we're just too busy to feel like we can make so much time to create an end of life plan, because it feels like amorphously in the future. And so people are always like, I'll do it later. When I have time, I'll do it later. When I have time, I'll figure it out. And that's like the lie that people tell themselves, is that somehow later you're going to have more time unless you've made the time.
Welcome to the New World Normal podcast. I'm Debbie Harrell, your host, and twice a month I'm speaking with some amazing humans who are disrupting norms and working to create a more inclusive and holistic society. These people are using their sphere of influence, no matter how large or small, to positively impact the world around them. They'll be sharing their expertise as well as sharing stories of resiliency and hope. We'll be talking about the issues that are affecting us all, from the environment, human rights, social issues, criminal justice, and education. We'll talk about our healthcare systems, wellness, and food, from how it's cultivated and distributed to how it's prepared and consumed. Basically, we're going to talk about all the systems in our society that aren't necessarily working for the benefit of the many. We'll strategize and collaborate on how we as a collective can intentionally make better choices every day that will lead to a positive change in the world around us. Because in the end, it's up to us to solve these problems. There is no magic potion or magic wand. It is us and our daily choices and how we spend our time and how we invest our resources. Intrigued? Stick around and have a listen, and by all means, click like or subscribe on your favorite podcast source. Hello and welcome back to the New World Normal podcast. I am Debbie, your coach, and today I'm speaking with DeCaneva, and I was super excited to have this conversation. Julia she started as a life coach for cancer survivors and burnout women, and was also a professional home organizer. And then you'll hear how she pulled at that thread and has led her now to become a death doula. So she helps people prepare for that inevitable time of our lives. And it's a fun conversation. Don't be scared off by the topic death, because I think you're really going to enjoy this one. Hello, welcome back to the New World Normal podcast. Today I'm here with DeCaneva, and I am super excited, and I think she is too, to talk about death. Which isn't something you get to say that often. I love that you and I first connected-ish. Last year when I first started the podcast, when I was reaching out for guests, and you had reached out because you were a cancer survivor and a life coach for burnout women, which was very aligned with my messaging. And then when I was going back through that deluge of responses I got last year for people that wanted to be on the podcast, looking for new interviews, you popped up again. And then I looked at your social media and saw that you shifted a little bit, and you are now interested in something that I had become super interested in, and that is death. I had actually looked at a couple courses on becoming a death doula once I got my life coaching certification. Thought that might be an interesting niche, but I haven't gone much further than that. So I'm interested to hear how you ended up there and what it's really all about.
Yeah, it's an exciting world. There's definitely the people who also get excited about it. You're like, oh yes, we should talk about this, because it just doesn't come up far enough in conversation for something that every single human has in common.
Right.
It's the only thing we have in common. But we like to pretend that that's not quite true. So really, I mean, as you said, I'm a cancer survivor. I was diagnosed at 29, which was approximately 3.5 years ago. And that really slapped me in the face with mortality. I had spent a lot of my life up to that point equal parts curious about and wanting to know more about death, and also pushing it away and trying not to think about it. Death anxiety. And when I invited this exploration of mortality into my life, I was like, wow, this is far less scary than I thought it would be. Of course, I have my own fears around dying. I think it wouldn't be human to be totally equanimous about it all the time. But generally speaking, I feel inviting mortality into my own life and bringing that lens to how I live and prepare for my inevitable death, whether it's in a couple minutes from now or in 60 years from now, has just been such a relief adding that in. And when I got done with cancer treatment, I was really burned out, hence the burnout. I was the poster child of burnout, being a freelancer, working web design and professional home organizing, which was really intense. Juggling two full-time jobs is a lot, and working for yourself is a lot, and the physical demands of home organizing was a lot. So coming out of cancer treatment, I was like, what am I going to do differently? What do I really want to do? And that's when I was like, well, I love the Gallup-Clifton Strengths Assessment. I think it can be a really valuable tool for people. I'll get certified. So I did, and then I promise this has a point.
No, I was curious. What did you say? What did you call it?
The Gallup-Clifton Strengths Assessment.
Okay.
It's a very much a tool used in a lot of corporate environments.
Okay.
And it works really well with team dynamics. But in my experience, it also is a really helpful tool for building compassion, if you kind of dig a little deeper. And I thought, well, I don't really know where I want to go with this, but it's a great starting point. So I built a website, I got an LLC, and then I was like, I really need photos on my website that aren't just like me smiling over a plate of sushi. It's probably good to have something a little more professional. And I booked a session with a photographer who I had originally found when I was looking for wedding photographers several years prior. And we got to talking. I think I mentioned my recent cancer experience, and she was like, oh, I love talking about death and dying. And I was like, you do?
You do?
How magical. And she had said, oh, I just completed this death doula training, who her now friend, Alua Arthur, started. And she was like, you should check it out. So I looked at it, I bookmarked it, and I was like, well, I've just spent a lot of money on the Gallup certification. Going into this being a life coach, like I should just move forward and not kind of like hop off the bandwagon just yet. But clearly it circled back, and I just did the training then in this year in 2022, in case someone's listening to this in several years from now. So that's like the very logistical version of how I got to death doulaing.
I love so many things about that story. I feel like, first off, the cancer experience leading you to want to do something more, right? They say the wounded healer, or the mess becomes your message.
Mm-hmm.
All those like pivotal life experiences we have that shift us in a way to want to have more impact on the world. I love that. I also love that you weren't quite sure. And so you're like, I'm going to try this. So you just pulled out a little thread, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then that led you to another thread. And then
yeah.
I love that synchronicity or alignment or manifesting of opportunities, whatever you want to call it. And the fact that you recognize that something corporate could also be something a little softer and more needed, as in compassion. And I would agree 100%. Anything that's going to tell us more about ourselves and how we tick and how other people work and why they do things, it's just going to lead to more empathy and compassion. And so I think it's awesome that you went for it. And then the path that led you back to where you are now.
Yeah, absolutely. You've hit all of the key points. And I think a really big part of coming out of home organizing was exactly getting away from the physical lifting and taking trying to pull what I loved from home organizing, which was intentional living, that you're choosing the people, places, things, everything in your life, and not just kind of blindly going around and not paying attention to everything. And looking for a way to carry that, because that was always really the transformative quality of home organizing that I think coaching is very much similar, where you're a mirror for people to let them see their life as it is and then make the changes and then support them with, a little bit of science and let them know about their nervous systems. And this sense of being intentional with your life only matters if you realize that it's going to end at some point. And I really danced around that a lot.
That's such an excellent point. I'm going to pause you for a second.
Yeah, please.
Because it does. Like, if you think you're going to live forever, nothing really matters. You can do whatever you want because we're all going to live forever. But when you realize this is a finite time I have here, what do I want to do with it? And then get intentional with that. That's a huge point.
Yeah, and I think it's not it's certainly not the mindset I learned in school. It was always about setting a goal and taking all the steps to meet the goal, very much this like sprint mentality. And my freelance burnout showed me that it is a marathon. There are not like goalposts that you reach and then suddenly you have spring break for 3 months, summer break for 3 months. Spring break for 3 months would be great too.
Right? Any break for 3 months, I'm a fan.
Yeah, totally. Totally here for it. And so really just coming back to being intentional, it's not like something I made up. I don't claim that to be my own. I'm just sort of like the evangelist of intentional living, and also being really purposeful with what you want your death to look like from the standpoint of how do you want things to be handled.
That's what I was going to say with the organization. I'm sure there's like a tangible part of that for the death planning as well, right?
Totally.
You see it all the time, and it's a little frustrating for me because I'm like a little more comfortable with the idea of death. I think when you see someone that has been sick for a very long time and then they pass and then their family is in turmoil on how do we handle all this stuff? What are we supposed to do? And it's like, why didn't you guys talk about this sooner? Like,
I know.
But you can't very well say that at that point. You're just like,
totally.
I'm so sorry. Like, I totally understand.
Mm-hmm. It's really that like wake up call. We're like, could this be done differently? I think this could be done differently.
I feel like that's part of like, hey, why don't we talk about it while we're well? And it's a little less scary of like, hey, this is what I would like to see. And this is where I want my assets, whatever they happen to be. Like, right. I was thinking about before I got on the phone, like, I really don't have many assets to worry about, but there's still that tangible of like, this is what I would like to happen. And this is how I want you guys to feel, because, I do have kids and I know it's going to be hard for them, but I've seen so many of my friends, my older friends, struggle with the loss of their parents. And I went through it with mine and another close family member, that I just don't want to burden them with that kind of grief. I mean, the grief is inevitable, but feel it, move through it. It's okay to be happy again. Like, I'm always going to be there. You're always going to have those memories. I don't know that that's good advice, but it's what I've felt. And then after I tell one of my kids that, they're looking at me, I'm like, don't worry, I'm not planning on going anywhere anytime soon, but it's going to happen. You watch The Lion King. We watch The Lion King together. It's going to happen.
Yes. Oh my gosh. So much of that. I think there's definitely a conflation of being prepared for death and wanting death. Like, I love life. I have enough curiosities to fill many lifetimes, and I am eager to live as long as possible to follow those curiosities. And I have a very thorough plan whenever my death happens. And it really is, like you were describing it, a gift to your loved ones, whoever's handling your affairs. I mean, unless you're like really spiteful and you really don't like the people handling your estate and you would like for them to have this big quagmire of things to slog through. Like,
quagmire. That's such a great word. I love that word. Sorry.
That's okay. It's your prerogative. But at the end of the day, the hope is that there is someone in your life who you love, blood family, chosen family, anybody, who would want to do for you what you've laid out for them. And exactly as you were saying, taking away the burden of the extra loose ends, it's hard enough to go through probate when everything is super buttoned up anyway, because it takes a long time and there's a lot of waiting and there's a lot of paperwork, even when things go very smoothly. And so if you can take away a lot of that slog for people, like what a beautiful gift that is for your loved ones. And in some ways, it can feel really supportive and like you're caring for yourself to make those preparations and say, this is the kind of burial type that I'd like. This is what mattered to me. And this is what would matter to me in my death.
Right. That just gave me goosebumps. That's your last bit of self-care and care for your loved ones. Like I care enough to have laid this all out for you to take that extra work off of you. So beautiful.
Yeah, it's really
kind of makes me want to cry.
Yeah, that's fine. Crying's allowed.
Right. Yeah. I'm a big crier. Happens all the time.
Me too. It's just a thing, being human. Yeah. But there are a lot of, as you were saying earlier, about being a professional home organizer is a very transferable skill to end of life care, because so much of end of life planning really is paperwork, but it's also just sitting with the things that you own or that you care about and understanding how it relates to your life now and how it would relate then to your death.
All the stuff, right? I'm sure.
Yeah.
Cue George Carlin's stuff bit. I don't know if you've heard that, but it's hilarious.
I have, yeah.
I have a story I would like to share of a friend who had cancer, brain cancer. She got treatment for a while, but then decided it just wasn't worth it. And it might be the catalyst of where I really started contemplating death and the acceptance of it, because she was such an example of, first of all, she had very strong faith. So I think that made it a little bit easier for her to be this example. But once she had made the decision, her sister came to be with her. They started sorting through all of her stuff, right? And inviting different groups of friends over. And she was giving away her stuff to people she cared about that she thought would enjoy. And you could see how much joy that gave her. And I know the stuff that I have is still super special to me. And it's just a reminder of a different way of doing it, and such a beautiful example of strength that I tell people a lot. Like, it was so amazing. I still don't know how she did it, but I hope that if I'm given the opportunity to know ahead of time, that I can be as grace-filled as she was.
It's such a beautiful story. I appreciate you telling me here. And it really is, I can't think of the right word. Like, I don't want to reuse the word a gift, but to be able to share that with her, that she wants to give you a part of her life. And it's equal parts remembrance and equal parts, maybe it's a very useful item that she would have just been really happy for you to be able to use it. And having that connection is such a beautiful opportunity. There's actually a practice. This isn't specific to them, but people call it Swedish death cleaning. And it's exactly what your friend did, where you go through all of your possessions before your death, specifically knowing that you're dying, or like it's very much in preparation for dying, not just decluttering, even though it's the same.
Right. It's probably very similar, but there is a slight difference, I would imagine.
The intention behind it is...
The intention. There's that word.
I know, it's like ding, ding, ding.
She knows I'm wearing my intention.
Yeah, I know. Shirt. I was like, oh, it's so good. It's so perfect. I'm like, she knows. She's on the wavelength.
It's part of my intentional apparel line on my website, if anybody would like to purchase their own.
The t-shirt is adorable, in case you haven't seen it. Yeah, it's lovely. And it's such a beautiful reminder for people, too. It's just like intention. And a lot of, for some reason, Swedish death cleaning has had a little bit of a, I think there was a New York Times article about it recently. It's having a little bit of a moment, which is, I say for some reason, I just don't know who was the first to be like, we should actually publish this. People are going to be interested. I'm like, yeah, we are. But I can really appreciate that it's starting to bring that conversation forward, because so much of home organizing and digital organizing is the unsaid question, the unsaid lens is, if you died tomorrow, could someone understand your file folders, your file structure? Could they find stuff on your computer for you? Like, that's the easiest way to organize something, like to create a system. But most people, when they're like, my closet is stuffed, they don't really want you to come in and say, okay, well, if you died tomorrow, what do you want to be done with your stuff? Like, that's too much.
Like, what?
Yeah, they did not.
Do you know something I don't?
Yeah. Oh gosh, I know. So, but it's really kind of exciting that maybe at some point that could eventually, that's like my utopia, is that home organizing, people are just very open about, I feel burdened by my things. I know they're not all important to me. And if I died, what would people even do with this?
Yeah. What are like 3 top things you suggest for your clients for organizing for the death? People love lists, but you can give me 2, you can give me 5, whatever you.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. And there are certain pieces that you need to have, and there's certain pieces that are really, really helpful to have. So I'm going to sort of ignore having a will and a notarized estate plan, just because a lawyer has to handle that. And so to have a death doula come in, for example, will be much better suited to, number one, passwords and accounts. Just getting all of it organized, even better if it's organized while you're very much alive and well. And there are really wonderful services like 1Password and LastPass that make that so much easier. And the key there is make sure that the people important to you know the master password of your 1Password. That's all I ask, because otherwise we're never going to access it, and it's going to be even more difficult or sort of disappointing. It's like having a safe that you can't crack. Passwords, though, because there's, beyond the grief, beyond the loss, really a death is purgatory, like digital organizing purgatory, because you have to submit affidavits places, you need to shut down social media accounts, turn off auto pay on things. It's just such a web. The more organized you can be in passwords starting tomorrow, like right now.
It's actually something I've been struggling with, because I keep doing the whole like, wait, what was my password for that? And the, like having to reset of the password and then having to change it everywhere that you're logged in on it. And then, and I'm like, there's got to be an easier way. And I was actually just thinking, are there like passwords? So I wrote down
I personally like 1Password the most. I have nothing against LastPass, but I just can't say enough good things about either program, because once you get the hang of it, which isn't difficult, and they have plenty of tutorial videos and all of that goodness, and I sometimes do workshops on passwords and things, it really is game changing, because that way you can also make sure your passwords are really secure.
And that's the other thing. Yeah. Because having the
twofold.
having the same one for everything is not good.
No,
just kidding.
Totally. But I mean,
but we all do.
We laugh, but so many people do. And then everyone adds 1, 2, 3, 4 exclamation point. I'm like, guys, the computers can crack that in 1 minute. Like, that's not an
it's
effective
the first
password.
thing they try.
Yeah. So, we're no match for the computing of a computer, which is how they crack passwords. So I just can't recommend passwords enough as keep your life safe. If you change no other password in your life, make sure your email password and 2-factor authentication are on, because if someone can reset your email password, they can reset every other login related to that one. And that comes up a ton in end of life organizing after a death, is we don't know their email password and we can't reset it because there's not like a backup email that we have access to. And so you just have to hope and pray that you don't accidentally log out on their phone until you're done, settling all of the accounts. Yeah, it's really stressful. And you're hoping that all technology will just not fail, which it's usually very consistent, but it's not foolproof. So that can be such a relief on so many levels, because you can also save documents in 1Password, for example. You can save your end of life plan document in 1Password.
That's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
That it's all, because a friend of mine and I were talking, and there are these binders. You can get them on Amazon that you fill out with all your last wishes. And then it's like, oh, but then you just hope somebody finds it, right?
Totally. And you hope that, heaven forbid, you die in a house fire. That's not super helpful. Like, I understand the analog, the tactile, but if you do want to make a binder, at least take photos of it and share it with people who would need to know it.
Really
so you can do both if you need to, or you'd like to. Yeah, I think passwords, number one. And then number two is creating your own end of life wishes that aren't related to settling your estate. For instance, writing out a Word doc that talks about, well, the meditation cushion in my office isn't worth money to me, so donate it to a friend of mine who meditates, donate it to a cancer support group who holds, giving people specific instructions on, this thing did not deeply matter to me. It served my life, but you shouldn't keep and cherish it like it was this, like, you don't make a shrine out of it kind of vibe. And that can be really supportive to do with pretty much all of your possessions. It's okay to do big categories. I have big airtight, watertight bins that have my mementos in them, and my husband knows that, but the rest of my family may or may not know where to find them in the closet. And so just letting people know, like, hey, this thing is here, this thing is here. Here are the accounts in a bullet point list that have recurring payments. Just update it. It's all of those little bits of your life that I'm like, if someone I love died and I'm in charge of going through all of these things, what would I want them to tell me? And then do that in reverse for yourself.
If you're enjoying this conversation, you'll love the discussions happening in the New World Normal community, where we meet regularly to discuss personal growth and social issues, because we know when we do our work, we're better able to navigate this ever-changing world. Be sure to follow the link in the show notes for more information. And a lot of times, you just don't know until you know. Like, there's a lot of little things, and until you experience the death of a loved one that you're in charge of, or even close to the person that's in charge of, it's a lot.
Yeah.
And all the little pieces you just don't think about. Yeah.
Totally.
Everything.
And because changing the name on the title of a car before you sell it, changing the name on homeowner's insurance, renter's insurance, like, just the slog, the admin purgatory, as I call it. And so having it listed out for people is helpful. I have mine set up like a choose your own adventure. It's not totally, I haven't made it that exciting, but it's like scenario one is, I'm not totally dead, but I'm incapacitated. Here's my doctor's name. Here's my preferred hospital. Here's my medical record number.
I'm just relishing in that choose your own adventure.
I was just trying to bring a little levity. If there's something really,
yes, humor is important.
It's
even
just
in death.
It's fun because they can exist together. Like, joy and death can exist. Sadness, joy, like all of those combinations. It's all of the above.
I'm a big fan of the and. Like, yes, the holding those two contradictory emotions.
Absolutely.
Or what seem to be contradictory, but not necessarily.
You're like, but on further inspection, not so much. And I do think that there's a lot of end of life planning that doesn't have to involve you wallowing in your inevitable death. I think it's an important part of the process is to really sit with that. But a lot of the times, like when I was writing out, like, you guys can have a party without me, and it doesn't have to be autoimmune paleo food, because that's how I have a bunch of food allergies.
Yes, you don't have to make sure there's a gluten-free option.
Exactly. Like, go hog wild on it. Yeah. And it's actually sort of fun. And it makes me feel like I would then be a part of that experience for them, even when I can't. And I have no idea what happens after we die. And, that comes up a lot for people. But what you know right now is that you can plan ahead. And a lot of times it makes people feel good right now to write that plan out. Everything else later is unknown.
I can imagine it's just like checking anything else off your list, that little lightness that you feel like, oh, okay, now I don't have to worry about that. And that's a big one.
It's a really big one.
So I feel like you should get several checks off the list for that one.
You do. Yeah. You get like mega gold stars. Yeah.
Gold stars, cookies, gluten-free, whatever you want.
Completely. And it's the kind of anxiety / burden that was very, at least for me, was very unnamed until I addressed it.
That's what it's like that simmering. It's always in the background.
Mm-hmm.
You don't really recognize that it's there consciously, but it is, because it, like we said at the beginning, it's inevitable.
Yeah.
We're all going to experience it at some point. Death and taxes, right? That's what they say. We all have to do it. So, of course it's simmering there for all of us. And the fact like, oh, my life is a mess. Like, nobody's going to be able to figure anything out.
Which is usually how it goes. And then we somehow forget how hard it was. But really, I think the issue, kind of speaking from my burnout place, is we're just too busy to feel like we can make so much time to create an end of life plan, because it feels like amorphously in the future. And so people are always like, I'll do it later. I'll when I have time, I'll do it later. When I have time, I'll figure it out. And that's like the lie that people tell themselves, is that somehow later you're going to have more time unless you've made the time. And that's a big part of why I'm excited to bring organizing skills to people as a death guide. Because it's like, well, part of the hurdle too is, where do you even start? Like, it's such an enormous task there's a huge learning curve on what do I even need to have? Hence your question exactly of like, what's the list? Like, what are the things people can focus on? And just having someone to hold your hand through the process and say, yeah, I figured this out. And especially because I think a lot of the resources, rightfully so, are aimed at older generations and just older folks in general. And while that's not wrong, and there's a whole subset of the population that's who needs it and that's who they are, there's also a really big gap in the I'm 20, I'm 30. I'm either well and just really think this is important, or I'm dying and they just told me I'm dying.
What do I do? Yeah. Yeah.
So many of the books and things are like, what kind of legacy do you want to leave for your grandchildren? And it's like, woo, that hits a lot differently when you're 30. Like, just an opportunity. So I think really, if I think about the list of things to think about, passwords, creating that end of life document with a little bit of fun and curiosity about the things in your life that you'd want to see go somewhere else.
And I love the addition of fun and humor to that document.
Yeah. Even if you're like, I'm not a fun person, fun's not in my, I'm like, you can at least find some ease in it, explore.
Do something real dark humor is still okay.
Completely fine. Any flavor of it. If you love board games, make it like a board game. Like, there's no, you can do whatever you want with it, which
Yeah,
is kind of exciting.
that is.
And as long as it's readable, basically. Don't put it in code. This is no time to make like puzzles and things out of it. But one here and there can be like a really lovely way to bring your personality out in it. And I think the third piece of like what's important, if you're like, okay, I want to start getting prepared for end of life. It seems obvious now because I've said it 1,000 times, but organizing your space, Swedish death cleaning, as it were. But even just starting with like one junk drawer and just taking the lens of, okay, if I died tomorrow, is this in order enough for people to like understand what's going on? And I don't mean that from a like everyone needs to be a minimalist. You don't have to get rid of a speck of the things that you own in this process, but it really is that first dip your toe into living with intention. And I think it's easiest to do that with physical items because you can see them. It's easier to comprehend.
I love that you mentioned starting with one drawer because the thought of death planning in itself can be overwhelming. But then the thought of like organizing your things is also overwhelming.
Completely.
So the two of those, it's like, I can't do any of this. That's probably a lot of reason why people are like, I'll do it later. I'll do it later because I don't have time to organize the junk drawer just for the sake of organizing the junk drawer, let alone with the thought like, oh yes, my mortality. Yeah. That is a fact.
Totally. And really, too, the junk drawer suggestion is because it has like, they're not usually super emotionally charged for people. Sometimes bits and pieces pop up in junk drawers that are like very sentimental, but most of the time it's like tape measures and pencils and stuff. And that's also the dip your toe in because if you get really to the core of what I would recommend here is organizing your own mementos and labeling them.
That's what I was going to say, because if there is something super sentimental in the junk drawer, people aren't going to know that. They're going to think it's the junk drawer. Like we could just toss all this stuff or like donate it or.
Yeah. Or you're just left with so many questions. So the core of this third recommendation is organizing your mementos, but it can be a little bit much to go like 0 to 100 on looking back at your yearbooks with the idea that someone would be looking at it after you've died. Like it's the experience differently. So, but I can't recommend the mementos in particular enough. Your junk drawer can stay your junk drawer. It's totally cool if you don't organize it at all, but just like looking at it, it's going to make such a big difference. And it will also help inform you on what matters to you. If you'd like to have any kind of memorial service, a memorial party, a memorial anything, would you like any of your mementos to be present there? Would you want certain people and certain photos to receive those photos after you've died? Do you have a name and address for them? Like currently, all of these pieces. And this is the kind of project that if you get a terminal diagnosis, it's going to feel much more urgent. And some of the pieces might not be able to be done. If you don't have a terminal diagnosis, the idea is that you probably can take more time to do it. And it's not guaranteed that you'll get more time. But the idea being that you kind of do it more slowly so that there isn't just like people listening to your podcast being like, this woman came on and all of the things that I haven't been doing for my whole life, she said that we should just drop everything.
Do it now.
Do it all right now.
Because we're gonna die.
Yeah, no. I'm like, oh no, I don't want that at all to be the takeaway. It's just this starting to open to this process.
I think that's a good
takeaway.
Like, yes, let's just be open to the idea that it's going to happen and people are going to be going through your things and help them out a little bit. I also wanted to touch on, like, if you do have a terminal diagnosis, there's a little more urgency, but there's also the urgency to focus on your care. So like finding that balance of, and I would imagine
Absolutely.
that getting a little more organized would also probably alleviate some of the stress that you're feeling about the diagnosis. So it could also be part of your care.
Yeah.
And recognizing that, like, I think a lot of people probably don't consciously recognize that. They're like, I can't deal with that because I'm not going to die. And I'm not saying just because you're planning and organized doesn't mean you're accepting or admitting
Totally.
defeat or like, I'm just going to die. But
Mhm.
alleviating some of that stress from yourself is probably going to be helpful for your treatment as well.
Yeah, and in fairness, as I had a lot of fun writing up my end of life plan and going through my mementos, it can be really life affirming to do sort of a life in review and almost a legacy project of your own for yourself. Because even if you get a non-terminal cancer diagnosis, like I had what they love to call the easy cancer, which is such a misnomer. But in fairness, chemo is not part of the treatment for thyroid cancer. And I think a lot of the intensity of cancer treatment can come from treatments like chemo that are very much ongoing. So I will say that. But even when you get you'll probably live to be an old lady cancer diagnosis, we just need to monitor it. There's just not like having the opportunity to look back at everything then gave me, I'll just talk from in my experience because that's all I talk for, a really wonderful opportunity to look forward at what matters. And so when you get a terminal diagnosis, there's this sense of like, I used to always say I would never want to know the day that I would die. And now I'm like, I don't know about that. That would actually be kind of helpful in some way. That's a whole other debate. But there's when you're, I feel like the thought is just like dissipating. So I guess I'll leave everyone in suspense until it comes back.
Tune in for part 2.
Yes, jeez. Julia remembers what her thought was. Oh my goodness. I think.
Well, you mentioned autoimmune. I also have autoimmune. So my brain shuts off and drifts away at the least opportune moments.
I know. And I'm on the thyroid suppression dose, so that I'm like on synthetic hormones and I'm on a purposely too high of a dose. And that just has brain fog written all over it.
It's good fun.
I'm doing what I can, yeah. But I think we were talking about getting a terminal diagnosis and having the opportunity to consider what a legacy project could look like. You had mentioned that it's really supportive to your own care to do so. And this is the thought that was floating around.
Yay!
Is a cancer diagnosis is all consuming. Like most people don't actively think about cancer in their life unless they have a very personal experience with it. And then one day a cancer is everything and it's everywhere and it's on billboards and it's at the airport and it's people asking you questions. And so having a break to go through your mementos, to go back through your yearbooks can often feel like joyful experience for people. There can, of course, be a lot of sadness and a lot of kind of anticipatory loss there of like, wow, this is the life I used to have. This life going forward is not the one that I thought, but like what a beautiful opportunity it is to look back and see like what mattered to you and who are you and what are the stories that you love to tell and can people tell about you and just all of those little bits about being human.
It's a beautiful thought and so bittersweet. And also in the event that it's not terminal, like what shifts is taking that time going to provide for you? Like we talked at the beginning, how, your mess becomes your message, you're the wounded healer. Like we take these pivotal times and then move forward, hopefully, or a lot of people do take the opportunity to shift and move forward in more intentional and ways that will be more impactful on the world around them. So yeah, considering that, like, hey, well, when I beat this, because you're probably trying to think in a very positive way, how do I want to live out the rest of my days?
Yeah. And I think there's even a version where it's not even as like when I beat this, as someone who has a microscopic tumor somewhere in my body that we can't find, that just hangs out. Like I'm not cancer free, but it's not actively growing. And that's an interesting space
Oh, I was gonna say that's
to
a
live in.
whole different ball of wax,
Yeah.
right?
But I think both, when you're like, okay, I'm in remission and I'm moving forward, but you're still in, I call it maintenance mode, where like every 3 months and then it's every 6 months you get blood work and every year you get blood work. And that really, in my mind, is like the brings me down to earth kind of moments when I have to go get blood work. I'm like, okay, have I checked in with myself lately? Am I doing the intentional things that I like to say that I'm doing? And it really is almost like an exercise in finding your core values. You can literally take one of the lists of core values off the internet. I think I even have one on my website, like linked elsewhere for people, because I'm like, it becomes so blindingly clear that if you're spending your time doing something that doesn't matter to you,
Why are you doing
it?
it? And before I started on this path or came to this more intentional way of or intentional lens, decisions. Oh my gosh, overwhelming. Every decision. But once you decide, like, I'm going to live aligned to my core values with intention, you're faced with a decision and you're like, oh, what do I do? Well, let me run it through these filters.
Yeah.
And large percentage of the time, the choice is much clearer. Like, oh, well, this does not take me closer to the life I want to live. So I'm not going to go that way. I'm going to go this way.
Yeah, absolutely. I've always referred to it like the flow chart of decision making is suddenly simplified. And then if you do end up in one that feels like you can't quite figure it out, it's usually more of a win-win situation. And then you're like, you can't lose. Like, great. It's not, that won't hold true all of the time, but I totally agree that there is a huge clarifying power in mortality, but mortality because it can really highlight, well, I don't have that much time on the earth. We seem to forget that pretty quickly. And
which I feel like would be another topic to peel apart. Like, why is that? But we are nearing the end of our time. And I'm sad because I could talk about this forever.
I could too.
Oh, I have my questions that I usually ask my guests at the end. New World Normal, we talk about disrupting norms. Today we're talking about disrupting death.
The conversation around death, maybe?
Yeah, that's it. So we can't disrupt death. It's going to happen. But if you could wave a magic wand and disrupt one thing that is normal in our society, culture, world, what norm would you disrupt?
I think death is very much societally specific. Different countries have very different feelings about death. So if I could wave the United States magic wand, it would be that we would all just talk about it like we talk about people giving birth to babies and any other kind of life transition. Like, you got a new job, you planned a new career, you bought a car,
I got my death plan all dialed in.
Totally.
Yeah.
Like, just really normalizing.
Let's go out for pizza. I just finished my death plan.
Yes. It sounds like a perfect reason to go out to pizza.
Yeah, I like it.
Yeah.
And then the other question we talk about I have an intentional lifestyle community as an offshoot from this podcast where we talk a lot about personal growth at the intersection of social issues and this crazy world we live in. And like, how do we support ourselves so we can be functional members of society? Do you have any practices that you do on a regular basis to support your personal growth, personal awareness?
Yeah, being able to show up in the world.
Right.
Yeah, my go-to practices are mindfulness and meditation. It's something I learned from cancer that I didn't realize was mindfulness. And I was like, oh, this is beautiful. Now I have language for it. And long walks and not eating the foods that I am intolerant to.
Oh my gosh.
Because they're everywhere. Yeah.
So huge. And I don't know about you, but from my personal experience, my body was telling me for years,
Oh,
like, oh, okay, you really shouldn't eat that. And I'm
no,
like, shh, it's good.
I know. I
Leave me
mean, for
alone.
me, it was probably 15 years. Led me right up to cancer's doorstep. Yeah.
I was like, I'm a little older than you. So mine was screaming at me for a while longer. And then
Yeah.
last year it was just blammo. Okay, you're not listening. I'm going to lay you out until you
Yes.
figure it out.
They're like, we'll just pull that rug out from under you and maybe just the floor too while we're at it. Yeah.
And it's really not that bad once you get used to eating a different way. And then your
Agreed.
body starts to respond to it and you start feeling good.
Yes.
Like, oh my gosh, why didn't I do this sooner?
I know. The beauty is in feeling well. That's the kicker, is you have to feel well in order to feel like motivated. And now it seems backwards to do anything otherwise.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
As I said, I could go on forever, but we're at the end. Do you have any parting words for our guests, where you hang out most, where people can get in touch with you? They have questions? Or...
Yeah. They can find me on the internet. My website is julia.coach. Very simple. You can find me on Instagram, although I haven't been posting very much there, at life.coach.julia. And I love talking about death. So if you need the first space to chat with somebody, call me, DM me. I'd love to help support you dip your toe into this world that's really, maybe, hopefully, not as scary as it might seem.
That's great. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And I've enjoyed every minute of this.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I've also very much enjoyed it.
Isn't Julia great? Wasn't that a fun conversation? Didn't I tell you so? Anyhow, I really hope you enjoyed that. And if you did, please consider sharing this episode with a friend, leaving a review. And as always, if you're interested in joining us in the collective for more conversation like this, head to nwncollective.com or click the link in the show notes. Have a great day. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to our show. If you enjoyed what you heard, feel free to subscribe and leave us a review. If you didn't enjoy what you heard, reach out to us and let us know how we can make it better. This show really is about all of us, not just me and my guests, but how we can all work together to make the world just a little bit better. And if you'd like to connect with us in other ways, be sure to follow us on Instagram. We also have a free Facebook group where our fans of the show can connect and discuss their favorite episodes. And in addition to that, we have a membership platform, The Collective by New World Normal, where you will participate in monthly workshops, pop-up challenges, and weekly meetings to support a more intentional lifestyle. We have meaningful conversations about important topics, all in a space that is safe, supportive, and encouraging. So join us. And if you'd like to show us some more support, check out our intentional apparel shop online, New World Intentions. You'll find t-shirts, hats, totes, all with positive messaging to help you move more mindfully through your day and help you to create that new world normal. You can also check out our affiliate page, where you'll find our favorite eco-friendly household and personal care products. Thanks again for listening.